Jason Statham, the famous actor known for his daring roles and fearless action, decided to step out of his usual world of cameras and sets and take on a challenge that was completely different from anything he had done before. It wasn't for a movie, it wasn't for a stunt, and it wasn't even for the cameras. This time, Jason wanted to experience life from a perspective that millions of people around the world face every day but few really understand. He wanted to live as a homeless person, even if only for a short time, to see what life was really like for those who had nothing. The idea came to him one evening while reading the news about homelessness in different cities. He was shocked by the numbers, but more than that, he was struck by the stories of real people who had lost their homes due to unexpected circumstances. There were stories of families separated, people losing jobs, and individuals struggling with health problems and mental health issues. Jason realized that despite his fame and success, there was a whole world that he didn't really know. He wanted to understand it not from reports or interviews, but from living it himself. Preparing for this was not easy. He had to leave behind his life of comfort, security, and recognition. He couldn't just step onto the streets as Jason Statham, the celebrity. He had to become someone else, someone invisible, someone who could blend into the crowd and experience the daily reality of life without a home. He researched what homeless people wore, how they survived on the streets, and what challenges they faced every day. He found that it wasn't just about not having a roof over your head. It was about surviving cold nights, finding food, avoiding danger, and dealing with people who looked at you with suspicion or ignored you completely. He started by changing his appearance. He grew out his hair slightly messy and let his beard grow in to look rougher. He chose old worn-out clothes that he could find easily, something that looked ordinary and unremarkable. He even learned a few tricks to make his movements and gestures look more like someone who was used to life on the streets. He wanted to make sure no one recognized him. If he was seen as Jason Statham, the entire experiment would fail. He needed to disappear into the background. Jason also thought about the practical side of living on the streets. He prepared small items that could help him survive: a water bottle, a small bag with essentials, and some food that could last a few days. He also made mental notes about staying safe, avoiding dangerous areas, and keeping a low profile. Even for someone as tough and trained as Jason, he knew that life on the streets could be unpredictable and dangerous. It was not a stunt, and it was not entertainment, it was real life. When the day finally came for him to start, Jason felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Leaving behind the life he knew, the fame, the security, even his own friends and team, he stepped into a different world. The streets were not glamorous or exciting, they were harsh, cold, and unforgiving. The noise, the smell, the constant movement of people going about their lives made him feel small and invisible. It was a world where survival was the main goal, and comfort was a distant memory. From the first steps, Jason realized how much he had taken for granted. Every small convenience, every safe night of sleep, every meal without worry suddenly felt precious. He walked past crowded streets where people were focused on their own lives. Most of them didn't even notice him. Some glanced quickly, some turned away, and some gave a look that made him feel like he didn't belong. He was invisible, and that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to see the world as someone who had no power, no money, and no recognition. The first night was the hardest. Jason had chosen a spot that looked relatively safe, but sleeping on the cold, hard ground was nothing like he had imagined. Every sound, every movement nearby kept him alert. The wind cut through his clothes, and the cold seeped into his bones. Hunger began to gnaw at him, and he realized how difficult it was to ignore the discomfort and stay calm. He watched other people on the street, some sitting quietly, some talking to friends, and some moving from one spot to another. Each of them had their own story, their own reason for being there, and he felt a strange mix of fear and respect for them. As the night passed, Jason observed the small things that mattered to people on the streets. A shared blanket, a cup of hot coffee offered to someone in need, a kind word from a stranger. He realized that survival wasn't just about finding food or a safe place to sleep. It was about community, about looking out for one another, even when resources were scarce. The people he saw had nothing, yet they still managed to care for each other in ways that many people with homes and money did not. The next day, Jason faced the challenge of finding food. He walked through streets, parks, and areas where homeless people usually gathered. He saw soup kitchens, small charities, and people handing out sandwiches. He didn't want to use his fame to get special treatment, so he waited in line just like everyone else, feeling the weight of being one among many, unnoticed and often ignored. He started to understand the feelings of loneliness and invisibility that many homeless people experienced. Even when help was offered, it wasn't always easy to accept. Pride, fear, and uncertainty made simple acts like asking for food or directions complicated. Throughout the day, Jason interacted with other homeless individuals. He listened to their stories without revealing who he was. He met people who had once had homes and jobs but lost everything due to accidents, illness, or financial problems. He met people who had never had stability and had grown up learning to survive on the streets. Each conversation was a lesson in resilience and human strength. He felt a growing respect for these people, for their ability to endure pain, hunger, and uncertainty while still maintaining hope. Jason also faced judgment and suspicion from people who assumed he was lazy or irresponsible. He learned that life on the streets was not only about physical survival, but also about dealing with the constant judgment of society. Some people looked at him with disdain, some with fear, and some with complete indifference. It was a reminder that being homeless often meant being invisible, or worse, being seen as less than human. This realization was difficult for him. He had spent his life being recognized and admired, and now he understood what it meant to be ignored, avoided, or dismissed. By the end of the first few days, Jason began to see patterns in life on the streets. There were routines, unwritten rules, and strategies for survival. People watched out for each other, shared resources, and found ways to cope with challenges that outsiders could hardly imagine. Jason noticed that even small acts of kindness, offering a drink of water, sharing food, or simply acknowledging someone's presence, meant a lot. He understood that the strength of these people was not in what they had, but in how they supported each other and kept going despite every hardship. This experience was opening Jason's eyes to a world that he had never truly seen. He felt empathy growing inside him, a deeper understanding of life beyond wealth and fame. He realized that the real strength was not in action scenes or stunts, but in enduring life's struggles with courage, dignity, and compassion. Each day on the streets was teaching him something new, something he could never learn in the comfort of his celebrity life. Even though it was difficult, Jason felt a strange sense of purpose. He wasn't there for a stunt or publicity. He was there to learn, to witness, and to understand. He knew that what he was experiencing would stay with him forever. This first part of his journey, the preparation, the initial immersion, and the first encounters with real street life, was shaping his perspective in ways he could not have imagined. It was the beginning of a journey that would challenge his mind, body, and heart, and change him in ways that no movie role ever could. The morning after his first night on the streets was difficult for Jason. He woke up stiff and cold, feeling every ache in his body from sleeping on hard pavement, but he also felt a strange sense of determination. The night had been harsh, but it had also taught him that survival was possible, even in the toughest conditions. He had seen small acts of kindness, small moments of hope, and those moments became the light that guided him through the day. Jason's first real encounter came at a park where some homeless people gathered in the morning to share news and sometimes breakfast. He approached cautiously, not wanting to draw attention to himself. At first, people looked at him with curiosity, and a few even seemed suspicious. They had learned over time to be careful with new people. Jason had to earn their trust not just by talking, but by showing he was willing to share and listen. He met an older man who had been living on the streets for years. The man's eyes held a mixture of sadness and wisdom. Jason listened quietly as he spoke about his daily struggles, the difficulties of finding food, the cold nights, and the loneliness that often felt worse than hunger. Jason asked questions carefully, learning about routines and strategies that helped people survive. He began to understand that life on the streets was a mix of vigilance, resourcefulness, and hope. Food became a challenge immediately. Jason tried finding small meals from local charities and shelters. Waiting in lines, sometimes for hours, gave him time to observe others and notice the struggles they faced. Some people were too shy or proud to ask for help, and others had no choice but to accept whatever was offered. Jason learned that even when food was available, it wasn't always easy to get it, and it was never enough for comfort or stability. The scarcity of basic needs forced people into constant planning and improvisation. He also noticed the unspoken rules of the streets. People avoided certain areas, respected each other's space, and sometimes shared small items of value like a blanket, a bottle of water, or a piece of fruit. Jason saw that survival depended on cooperation, even among strangers who had very little. He began to participate, offering small gestures like sharing water or helping carry belongings. These small actions allowed him to slowly build trust and become part of the temporary community. As the day went on, Jason faced moments that challenged both his body and mind. The sun was hot and finding shade was difficult. He felt the hunger gnawing at him, and he realized how constant it was for those who had no access to regular meals. He also noticed how people reacted to him. Some walked past without a glance. Some offered small smiles, and a few shared their own food or drinks. He understood that while society often ignored homeless people, kindness could come from unexpected places. He spent time talking with a young woman who had been homeless for over a year. She spoke about her fears, how hard it was to sleep safely, and how loneliness could be overwhelming. Jason listened closely, realizing that emotional survival was as important as physical survival. The woman's stories helped him understand the resilience required to live without support, and he felt both admiration and sadness for the people who faced these challenges daily. Throughout the day, Jason also observed how the public treated homeless people. Some ignored them completely. Some offered coins or food, and others reacted with anger or suspicion. These encounters were eye-opening. He realized how much prejudice existed and how it made survival even harder. People were not just fighting against hunger or weather. They were also battling stereotypes and the indifference of society. By afternoon, Jason's body was tired, but his mind was full of new insights. He noticed patterns in behavior, how people found safe spots to rest, how they scavenged for food, and how they looked out for each other. He also noticed how certain gestures, like a smile or a friendly word, could brighten someone's day. It was a world where little things mattered greatly. Jason found a quiet corner to rest and observed the environment. He watched interactions among people, noting how families sometimes struggled together and how some individuals had lost touch with relatives or friends. The stories he overheard were heart-wrenching yet inspiring. They spoke of human endurance, courage, and the will to survive against odds that most people would never face. Evening brought new challenges. Finding a safe place to sleep was never easy. Jason followed advice he had received from those he had met, finding a spot tucked away from main streets, sheltered from the wind, and hidden from those who might cause trouble. He observed others doing the same, some in groups for safety, some alone, each with their strategies to stay out of danger. That night, he faced hunger and discomfort more intensely than the previous night. Sleep was difficult and every sound made him alert. But amidst the discomfort, he saw moments of humanity. One person shared a small blanket with another. A group whispered and laughed softly, trying to keep spirits alive. Jason realized that even in hardship, people found ways to support each other and maintain dignity. Over the next few days, Jason began to form deeper connections. He learned names, small details about lives, and the reasons why people had ended up on the streets. Each story was unique, some tragic, some a result of bad luck, and some due to decisions made under pressure or desperation. He saw how circumstances could change anyone's life, and how quickly stability could be lost. Jason also began to understand the mental toll of street life. Constant alertness, fear, uncertainty, and lack of privacy wore on people. Even small things like someone moving a bag of belongings or a stranger shouting could cause immense stress. He empathized deeply with the emotional and psychological burden of being homeless. Food and water remained daily challenges. Jason learned how to find small meals and clean water, how to ask politely for help, and how to ration what he had. Every bite and sip became precious, and he began to appreciate the simple comforts that most people took for granted. He saw how people on the streets adapted to scarcity, finding clever ways to make limited resources last. Despite hardships, Jason found moments of joy and laughter. People shared stories, joked quietly, and celebrated small victories like finding a warm place to sleep or a hot meal. These moments were brief but powerful, reminding him that even in the darkest situations, human spirit could shine. He felt a growing respect for those who endured hardship with dignity and resilience. By the end of the week, Jason's understanding of homelessness had deepened dramatically. He had witnessed the struggles, the dangers, and the emotional challenges. He had seen acts of cruelty and kindness alike. Most importantly, he had formed real connections with people who had stories to tell, lives that mattered, and experiences that deserved to be heard. This part of his journey was transformative. Jason realized that living on the streets was not just about lacking material possessions. It was about facing society's judgment, enduring constant uncertainty, and finding ways to maintain hope and dignity. He saw resilience in ways he had never imagined, and began to understand the true meaning of empathy and human connection. He went to sleep that night, exhausted, hungry and sore, but with a heart fuller than he had expected. He knew that the lessons he was learning would stay with him forever. The streets had become a classroom, and the people he met were teachers, guiding him to a deeper understanding of life beyond comfort, fame, and wealth. Jason's journey as an undercover homeless man was just beginning, and every moment brought new insights, challenges, and human connections that would change his perspective forever. As Jason moved further into his experiment, the streets became a harsh teacher, showing him a side of life he had never truly understood. Each day brought new difficulties. Each night brought new fears. And slowly he realized that the challenges of street life were far more intense than he had imagined. It was not just a test of endurance, but a test of character, patience, and humanity. One morning, Jason woke to the sound of shouting. A group of people had arrived at the spot where he had been sleeping, and tensions quickly rose. Arguments over space, resources, and personal boundaries were common, but witnessing them firsthand was jarring. Jason stayed quiet, watching the conflict unfold, careful not to draw attention. Even small disagreements could escalate quickly. He realized that life on the streets was often unpredictable and could turn dangerous in a moment. Being alert was not optional. It was necessary for survival. Hunger was another constant challenge. Jason discovered that finding food required creativity, patience, and sometimes humility. He visited soup kitchens, accepted donations from kind strangers, and scavenged when necessary. Each meal was a small victory, a relief from the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. Yet even with these efforts, hunger remained a constant companion, reminding him that life without stability was a daily struggle. As he navigated the city streets, Jason noticed the darker aspects of street life. Theft, harassment, and exploitation were common. People who had nothing often had to protect what little they owned. Jason experienced theft firsthand when a stranger took a small bag of belongings from nearby without warning. It was a harsh lesson that survival required vigilance, quick thinking, and sometimes self-restraint. He had to learn to walk carefully, to trust selectively, and to judge situations wisely. Beyond physical challenges, Jason felt the emotional weight of the streets. He saw despair in people's eyes, loneliness in the way they walked, and a longing for connection that was rarely fulfilled. Some individuals had lost families or were estranged from their communities. Jason realized that the emotional and mental toll of homelessness could be just as devastating as hunger or exposure to the elements. Each story he heard added to his understanding of the resilience required to survive. One afternoon, Jason followed a man who seemed familiar with the city's streets. The man taught him shortcuts, safe places to rest, and where to find resources. He also shared stories of hardship and survival. Jason learned that knowledge of the environment, awareness of people, and careful planning were as essential as courage. Street life was a skill, a constant exercise in strategy and adaptation. He watched how the man interacted with others, noticing gestures of respect, small exchanges of food, and protective behaviors that created an unspoken community code. Weather also became an enemy. Rain, cold winds, and sudden temperature changes were constant threats. Jason experienced nights where wet clothing and cold winds made it nearly impossible to sleep. He realized how exposure could wear on the body, how illness could creep up, and how vulnerable people were without shelter. He saw others struggle, shivering under thin blankets, trying to stay dry under cardboard or tarps. The resilience to endure such nights amazed him, and he began to understand the true meaning of fortitude. One particularly challenging day, Jason encountered a group of people in a tense situation. Arguments had escalated, and there was a real risk of violence. Jason kept his distance but observed closely. He learned that street life often required diplomacy, restraint, and awareness. Decisions had to be made quickly, and mistakes could have serious consequences. The experience reminded him that danger was a constant, unpredictable companion. Survival was not guaranteed, and every day carried risk. Food scarcity was not the only struggle. Water, hygiene, and basic medical care were almost impossible to find. Jason noticed people with untreated injuries, infections, and illnesses. The lack of access to medical care was stark, and he began to understand the compounded suffering that homeless individuals faced. Even small injuries could become serious, and the absence of proper treatment made every risk greater. This knowledge deepened his empathy and respect for those who endured such challenges daily. Despite the difficulties, Jason continued to build relationships. He spent time with a woman who shared stories of her childhood, how she had lost her home and how she coped with constant fear and hunger. She spoke about hope in small things, finding a kind word, a warm meal, or a place to rest for the night. Jason learned that hope was fragile but vital, a lifeline that kept people moving forward despite overwhelming odds. The human connections he formed were not just comforting, they were essential for emotional survival. Jason also began noticing societal attitudes more deeply. People walking past without acknowledgement, expressions of judgment or outright hostility, highlighted how much homeless individuals faced daily. These experiences were humbling. He realized that being ignored or looked down upon was part of the struggle, that social invisibility could hurt as much as physical discomfort. Understanding this changed how he viewed compassion, community, and the responsibility of society toward those in need. Night brought its own set of trials. Jason found a corner behind a building, somewhat sheltered from the cold wind. He saw others preparing for the night with care, moving quietly and finding spots that offered some protection. Each person had strategies, routines, and unwritten rules to survive the darkness. Jason followed their lead, learning the rhythms of life after sunset, how to avoid dangers and how to stay alert without being paranoid. The night was both a teacher and a reminder of vulnerability. During this period, Jason also learned to handle the mental strain. Stress, fear, and exhaustion were constant companions. Simple tasks like walking to a shelter or waiting in line became tests of patience and endurance. He saw how some people had adapted, developing mental toughness and coping mechanisms that allowed them to survive. Observing and participating in this life taught Jason lessons about perseverance, self-control, and the resilience of the human spirit. One evening, a small act of kindness reminded Jason why empathy mattered. A stranger offered him a sandwich and a bottle of water. The gesture was simple, but in the context of street life it was profound. Jason realized that small actions could have a significant impact, that humanity could shine even in the darkest circumstances. He began to see the importance of community, trust, and mutual support in a way that no movie role could ever teach him. Over several days, Jason faced new risks. Harsh weather, potential confrontations, and the constant challenge of finding food and safe resting places tested him in every way. Yet through these experiences, he continued to grow. He learned how to navigate streets, rid people, and manage resources carefully. Each difficulty became a lesson, each challenge an opportunity to understand life more deeply. The emotional aspect of street life became more evident as he spent more time with people who had lost everything. Stories of personal tragedy, bad luck, and systemic failures revealed the complexity of homelessness. Jason realized that behind every person was a unique story, a history that shaped their current reality. The experience taught him to look beyond appearances, to listen, and to understand that everyone had a reason for being where they were. By the end of this part of his journey, Jason's perspective had shifted dramatically. He had seen fear, hunger, and danger firsthand. He had witnessed human resilience, kindness, and hope in the face of overwhelming odds. Every encounter, every hardship, and every small victory had left a mark on him. Life on the streets was not a temporary experience. It was a lesson in survival, empathy, and understanding that could change anyone who truly experienced it. Jason went to sleep that night exhausted, hungry and wary, but with a deeper sense of respect and awareness. The dangers he faced were real, the struggles intense, and the lessons invaluable. Life on the streets had tested him physically, mentally, and emotionally. He understood more than ever that homelessness was not just a lack of home, but a daily battle for dignity, safety, and survival. And in facing these challenges, he was learning what it truly meant to be human. Jason continued his undercover life on the streets, and as time passed, he began to notice lessons that went beyond survival. The challenges, the people, and the small acts of kindness around him were teaching him lessons he had never encountered in his comfortable life. Every day brought new insights, new stories, and a deeper understanding of the human spirit. One morning, Jason met an older woman who had been on the streets for many years. Her face was lined with experience, and her eyes carried both sorrow and wisdom. She spoke about her past, how life had taken unexpected turns, and how she had learned to survive one day at a time. Jason listened intently. Her story was not just about hardship. It was about resilience. He realized that survival was not just about physical endurance, but about emotional strength and hope. He learned about the routines people developed to cope with street life. There were places where food was reliably available, certain shelters were safer than others, and some areas were better for resting at night. These routines were not glamorous or easy, but they were essential. People had to adapt constantly, learning from mistakes and observing the environment carefully. Jason began to appreciate the intelligence and strategy involved in surviving under such conditions. One of the most striking lessons came from observing the generosity among homeless individuals. Even when they had very little, people shared blankets, food, or even words of encouragement. Jason realized that kindness was not dependent on wealth. It was a choice, a reflection of character. The bonds formed in this harsh world were strong and vital for emotional survival. He learned that helping others created hope not only for those receiving help, but also for those giving it. As the days passed, Jason became more aware of the challenges posed by health issues. Many people suffered from untreated illnesses, injuries, or chronic conditions. Access to doctors, medication, and hygiene was limited. He saw how this added an extra layer of struggle to daily life. Simple things like keeping a wound clean or staying hydrated could be life-threatening challenges. Jason began to understand the compounded difficulties that people faced and how easy it was to fall into a downward spiral without support. He also learned about the emotional resilience required to face judgment and stigma. Many homeless individuals experienced daily disrespect, suspicion, or avoidance. Jason saw how people developed mental strategies to cope, to maintain self-respect, and to navigate interactions with strangers. He observed how humor, small acts of rebellion, or finding moments of joy helped people stay mentally strong. This emotional intelligence was something Jason admired deeply. Jason spent time with a man who had been homeless for over a decade. The man shared stories of hope and despair, of mistakes and survival. He spoke about how moments of kindness, even from strangers, could lift spirits and provide strength. Jason realized that life on the streets was not only about enduring hardships, but also about noticing and appreciating small victories. A warm meal, a safe night, or a smile from a passerby could mean more than anyone with a comfortable life might imagine. Every interaction Jason had was teaching him empathy in ways he had never experienced. Listening to personal stories, seeing hardships firsthand, and witnessing acts of courage and kindness opened his eyes to the complexity of human life. People he met were not defined by their circumstances, but by how they handled them. He began to see strength in ways he had never associated with the people on the streets. Jason also learned about hope in the midst of adversity. Many individuals on the streets had dreams, goals, and memories that gave them the will to keep going. Some hoped to reconnect with family, find a stable job, or recover from addiction. Jason realized that even in dire circumstances, hope was a lifeline. He saw that maintaining hope was as important as finding food or shelter, and that it required effort and courage. He noticed the difference between temporary relief and long-term solutions. While soup kitchens and shelters provided immediate support, they could not solve the underlying issues. Jason began to understand that homelessness was a complex problem with many layers: economic struggles, social inequality, mental health, and more. He realized that addressing these issues required empathy, community involvement, and systemic change. Through his observations, Jason discovered the importance of trust. Trust was rare but essential. People had to rely on one another to survive, and breaches of trust could have serious consequences. Jason learned how trust was earned slowly, through consistency and respect. He saw how broken trust could lead to isolation and increased danger, and how maintaining it could foster safety and community. One afternoon, Jason watched a group of homeless individuals help each other clean up a small area. remove trash, and prepare a space to rest. The act was small, yet it showed dignity, pride, and care. Jason realized that even in difficult circumstances, people sought to maintain their humanity and surroundings. This lesson was profound. It taught him that dignity was not about wealth or appearance, but about actions and respect. Jason also reflected on his own life during this experience. He thought about comfort, security, and fame, and how these things had shielded him from understanding struggle. Living on the streets, he had to confront vulnerability, dependence, and fear. He realized that these experiences were teaching him humility and grounding him in reality. Every day was a mirror, showing him what truly mattered in life: human connection, empathy, and resilience. He began to notice patterns of generosity from strangers as well. People walking by would sometimes leave food or blankets for those in need. Jason saw how these small gestures made a huge difference. He realized that awareness and compassion were key to improving lives, even in small ways. The kindness of strangers was a reminder that humanity existed everywhere, even in a world that often seemed harsh and indifferent. Over time, Jason grew more confident in navigating street life. He knew where to go for food, how to avoid danger, and how to interact with others without creating conflict. Yet he remained humble, knowing that survival could be fragile and circumstances could change in an instant. This awareness kept him alert, respectful, and thoughtful. He learned that resilience was not just about enduring hardship, but also about adapting wisely and maintaining a positive outlook. By the end of this part of his journey, Jason had internalized many lessons about life, survival, and humanity. He understood the power of empathy, the importance of hope, and the strength that comes from community. He realized that material possessions were not the measure of a person's value, and that courage, kindness, and resilience were true indicators of strength. As he lay down to sleep each night, Jason reflected on the stories he had heard, the people he had met, and the lessons he had learned. Life on the streets was harsh, unpredictable, and often cruel, but it was also full of humanity, connection, and small victories. He knew that the understanding he was gaining was rare, a privilege in itself despite the circumstances. These experiences were shaping him in ways no film role could ever do, teaching him about life in its most raw and honest form. Jason had entered the streets to observe and learn, but in reality he was being taught by the people he met. Their resilience, hope, and kindness were lessons in humanity. Every interaction, every challenge, and every act of generosity had a lasting impact on him. He began to see the world differently, to understand struggles that many ignored, and to value the strength of people who lived in adversity daily. This part of his journey solidified Jason's belief in the importance of empathy, understanding, and human connection. He realized that true strength was not about fame or wealth, but about endurance, compassion, and hope. The lessons from the streets were deep, powerful, and unforgettable. They would guide him not only in the remaining days of his undercover experience, but also in how he lived his life beyond it. After spending several weeks living undercover as a homeless person, Jason was ready to leave the streets, but the experiences he had lived and the people he had met had changed him forever. The knowledge he had gained was profound, and he felt compelled to share it with the world in a way that could inspire change, understanding, and compassion. He had seen pain, struggle, and despair, but also kindness, resilience, and hope, and he wanted to make sure these lessons were not lost. The first thing Jason did after leaving the streets was take time to reflect. He remembered every conversation, every struggle, every small act of generosity. He thought about the older woman who had taught him resilience, the man who had shown him how to navigate the streets safely, and the young woman who had spoken about her hope despite her hardships. Each person had left an impression, and he realized that these encounters had given him a perspective that very few people in the world ever got to experience firsthand. Jason knew he wanted to share this experience, but he also wanted to respect the privacy of the people he had met. He didn't want to exploit their stories, but he wanted to shine a light on the challenges of homelessness and the courage of those who lived through it every day. He began recording his thoughts, writing down his experiences, and carefully considering how to communicate the lessons he had learned in a meaningful and respectful way. When he eventually revealed his undercover journey to the public, the reaction was overwhelming. Fans in the media were shocked to learn that someone as famous as Jason Statham had voluntarily lived as a homeless person to understand life from their perspective. His story was covered widely, but he focused on sharing what he had learned rather than seeking recognition for himself. He talked about the daily challenges of hunger, exposure, and emotional strain, but he also highlighted the small acts of kindness, the friendships, and the resilience of the people he had met. Jason spoke about the lessons that anyone could take away from his experience. He emphasized empathy and understanding, urging people to recognize the humanity of those who are homeless. He explained that many people end up on the streets not because of laziness or poor choices, but due to circumstances beyond their control, like job loss, illness, or family difficulties. By sharing these stories, he hoped to break stereotypes and foster compassion in society. He also focused on the importance of community support. Jason had seen firsthand how small gestures, offering food, clothing, or even a kind word, could make a huge difference. He explained that society often ignored the struggles of homeless individuals, but that everyone could play a role in creating positive change. Even small contributions could restore dignity and hope to someone in need. The impact of his story extended beyond public interest. Non-profit organizations, shelters, and advocacy groups highlighted Jason's experience to raise awareness and support for homeless people. His story encouraged donations, volunteering, and community involvement. Jason realized that living on the streets had given him a platform to make a real difference, not through fame, but through understanding and action. In addition to public awareness, Jason's personal life had changed. He approached relationships, conversations, and daily challenges differently. He had a deeper appreciation for basic comforts, food, shelter, safety, and understood the fragility of life in ways he never had before. He became more patient, compassionate, and grounded. Even the simplest acts, like giving someone a smile or listening to their story, held new significance. Jason continued to engage with some of the people he had met on the streets, helping them access resources, find shelter, or connect with programs that could support them. He learned that sustaining change required ongoing effort, not just one-time gestures. He realized that empathy must be paired with action, and understanding must lead to support. This approach became a guiding principle for him, both personally and publicly. He reflected on the emotional lessons he had learned as well. Living without security, money, or comfort had revealed the depth of human resilience. People endured unimaginable hardships yet still found ways to support each other, maintain hope, and preserve dignity. Jason realized that strength was not measured by fame or wealth, but by the courage to face life's challenges and the ability to show kindness despite hardship. Jason also shared the subtle, often overlooked experiences of homelessness. The constant uncertainty, the need to be vigilant at all times, the difficulty of securing basic necessities, these were daily realities for millions of people. He explained that society often underestimated the mental and emotional toll of living without stability. Through his story, he encouraged people to recognize these challenges and to respond with empathy rather than judgment. One of the most important messages Jason conveyed was about hope. Even in the most difficult circumstances, people found reasons to keep moving forward. He highlighted stories of perseverance, dreams, and resilience, showing that the human spirit could endure despite adversity. He encouraged viewers, readers, and followers to see the potential for change in every individual, regardless of their current situation. Jason's experience also taught him the value of humility. Living on the streets, he had to rely on others, accept help, and confront vulnerability.